First this hour, China's economy picked up again in April. Retail sales, industrial output both grew, but they did miss analyst expectations. Gao An starts us off.
In April, China's index of services production increased by 13.5% year-on-year as the sector continued to recover.
国内需求持续扩大，市场销售较快增长。
Domestic demand continued to expand. Market sales grew rapidly. With the early recovery consumption sinks, residents' consumption propensity has gradually increased. Especially the service consumption has improved significantly.
In April, the total value added of industrial enterprises above a designated size grew by 5.6% year-on-year. In terms of products, the output of new energy vehicles and solar cells went up by 85% and 69% year-on-year respectively.
外贸韧性的持续显现。
The resilience of foreign trade continued to emerge. Although the international situation is complicated and severe, the policy stabilizing foreign trade continues to be effective. Foreign trade economic entities are actively expanding the international market, and economic and trade exchanges with countries along the Belt and Road continue to expand.
Officials said employment was generally stable, and the urban surveyed unemployment rate went down in April. Boosting the digital economy, green transition, innovation, and promoting investments in manufacturing were also discussed. While China's economy has sustained the momentum of recovery, officials said that we must give full play to the effectiveness of policies, boost the vitality of business entities, expand demand, and accelerate modernization of the industrial system to pursue high-quality development. Gao An, CGTN, Beijing.
For more on what these numbers mean for China's recovery, we're joined by Ann Lee. She taught at Peking University, among others, and is the author of the books, What the U.S. Can Learn from China and Will China's Economy Collapse? Catchy titles there, Ann. Welcome to the show. Good to see you again. So what did we learn about China in these latest numbers that some experts are calling uneven?
So I think that when people say China's numbers really disappointed expectations, I would say that's actually partly spin, because if you had industrial production that was over 5%, what other countries in the world are basically printing such strong numbers in such an uncertain global economy? I would say that it's actually quite strong, and I think it's just a matter of perspective. Obviously, you know, people point to when China was growing in double digits, but China's economy is so much larger now. So to grow a percentage point these days means they're generating a lot more dollars in GDP terms. So I think that if we basically put it into context, I would say that the numbers are actually fairly healthy.
The reasons people are giving to this is in large part because the pandemic is over, people are out and about, factories are humming again, people are spending money again, people are traveling again, you've got foreign investors coming back into the country, vice versa. So things are seemingly back to normal, right? So for the rest of us outside of China, what should our expectations be for the remainder of the year?
I mean, certainly people want to look for good news, and China in the past has been very consistent in delivering economic growth. We have to remember that, you know, trying to start things up when they were ground to a halt for months will take time, and it takes time for companies to rehire workers. It takes time to fix broken supply chains, and China also is facing the headwinds from the U.S., who is very, very serious about trying to handicap China's growth. You know, we see in the news all the time that the U.S. Is trying to restrict exports to China and imports from China, and so China has a lot to contend with, and these geopolitical tensions are real, and so I would say to be more realistic about China's prospects, we have to take those exogenous factors into account.
Right, and I think back and I think you and I have been following the Chinese economy long enough to know that there's always been this sort of tension, right, between the United States and China. And ultimately, we continue to complain about each other. I won't get into the details, but the bottom line is the top line number, the amount that China buys from the U.S. and the amount the U.S. buys from China keeps going up for the most part. And despite all the rhetoric, despite the contention, we do a near record amount of trade with each other. So I feel like the relationship has bifurcated into sort of there's this political relationship and then there's this business relationship, right?
Yes, although in the past, basically the political interests generally would trump business relationships. The U.S. always takes its national security concerns as its, number one priority. And so even though historically the trade numbers have been very strong and continue to grow, and that's a good sign. However, we should be aware that that could turn around at any given point and do that U-turn, potentially very drastically too. So let's hope that doesn't happen, but we have to be mindful that that is, a very likely scenario.
You're referring to perhaps a policy risk of some sort, correct? That there might be an overreaction on potentially either side. Maybe you could share with us sort of what worries you most about the potential of a policy risk here.
Well, I think that Taiwan is certainly top of mind. The U.S. Policymakers certainly are preparing for potential military action in that area of the world. And so, that could have dramatic economic repercussions to China as well as the rest of the world. So that's obviously just one potential scenario. There are others. And so, I cannot foresee which event might trigger something like this, but I'm just saying that there are multiple ones out there.
Right, and then the flip side to that is that there are some positive things that are happening in the relationship. Is that, from my perspective, I think the rhetoric or the discussions seemingly has been tampered down from its peak not too long ago. It seems to me that politicians have sort of taken a bit of breather on this to let China recover, let the U.S. recover, and everyone seems to be busy with their own geopolitical stuff. That said, if we continue to this path that we are right now, where things are sort of seemingly de-escalating, that must be good for both sides and, of course, the relationship.
Well, so maybe things are slightly less tense in the last week or two, but it is actually still at record high tension as far as I'm concerned, given the historical trajectory of the relationship. And I would say that realistically, those forces in Washington that are still extremely hostile to having a friendly relationship with China are still extremely loud and powerful. They have not gone away. And I think if there's a pause right now, it's only because perhaps there are folks in Washington who want to make sure they get all their ducks in the row in terms of, all their alliances being solidly behind the U.S. And maybe there's still disagreements amongst European leaders or perhaps in Asia. And so it's not that the U.S. is necessarily having second thoughts about having a friendly relationship with China. I think they're basically trying to figure out what is their best leverage. So I'm not terribly optimistic yet.
All right, Ann Lee, appreciate your thoughts as always. Thank you. China now continues to strengthen its ties with countries in Central and Eastern Europe. About 400 exhibitors from those countries are showing off food products, home goods, and more. An expo in East China's Ningbo City. Wu Bin has more.
The bilateral trade volume between China and the Central and Eastern European countries, or CEECs, have rapidly grown by a recent annual rate of more than 8%. And a 5-day expo in East China's coastal city of Ningbo is aiming to further strengthen the trade and economic cooperation between the two sides.
The trade scale between China and CEECs exceeds $100 billion, an increase of 1.6 times in 10 years. The two-way investment continues to expand, with a cumulative investment scale of nearly $20 billion.
Over 3,000 exhibitors, over 400 of them are from foreign countries attending the expo, and more than 10,000 purchasers also registered to find quality products to import from Central and Eastern Europe. As the guest of honor this year, Hungary is participating with a delegation led by its foreign minister.
We Hungarians do not consider China as if it was either a risk or a threat. But we do consider China as a country, cooperation with which brings a lot of profit and benefit.
The China-CEEC cooperation mechanism was born in 2012 against the backdrop of the European debt crisis. Over the years, cooperation in sectors like energy, infrastructure, logistics, and automobile parts has brought substantial benefits to each side.
Well, Slovakia is a very active member of the CEC Expo, and we are participating every year since 2015 because we see there's a great opportunity to present ourselves here in Ningbo in Zhejiang province.
Since the establishment of the mechanism in 2012, leaders of China and the CEECs have met 8 times. And in 2021, Chinese President Xi Jinping said China aims to import products that are worth over $170 billion from Central and Eastern European countries in the next 5 years. And organizers of the expo are vowing to facilitate reaching this goal with a focus of agricultural products and consumer goods. Ubin, CGTN, Ningbo, Zhejiang Province.
China opens another summit with leaders from Central Asia on Thursday. President Xi will host the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan in Xi'an, and they're expected to discuss issues of common concern.